Welcome to this new automotive news video for Thursday, April 30th, 2026. On the agenda today, we're going to talk about two pieces of good news about Stellantis. The first is that the group has published its results for the first quarter of 2026, and they're pretty good. In any case, compared to those of 2025. The second piece of good news, and in my opinion the most interesting, is that the Stellantis group has finally chosen which engine will replace the 1-liter PureTech in the future generations of its models. We'll also talk about major car brands like Toyota, which are starting to be seriously affected by various shortages and stockouts due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And finally, we'll talk about Durizotti. You probably don't know this name, and yet it's the French company responsible for preparing, modifying, and transforming the Alpine A110 models for the French gendarmerie, among others. Well, unfortunately, Durizotti is about to shut down, partly because of the government, and we'll talk about it in this video. First, let me share some extra details about yesterday's video. Yesterday, we were talking about the new electric Polo unveiled by Volkswagen, whose entry-level prices compete with those of the electric Renault 5 at around 25,000 euros, but with better charging speed and better range, which makes it a pretty well-positioned vehicle if you're looking to buy an electric city car. However, in the evening, Volkswagen released the prices for the mid-range and high-end versions of its Polo. And here, I think the Volkswagen Group has completely lost its mind. Because the prices shown for the 52 kW battery version capable of 455 kilometers of range are 36,000 euros. That's far too expensive compared to competitors, especially Tesla, which remains the benchmark in electric cars. With Tesla, for that price, you get a Model 3 that has 80-kilometer more range, is more powerful, has a better charging speed, and is technically superior in terms of class, since we're talking about a sedan here, while the Polo is more of a city car. Basically, for the same price, the Tesla Model 3 is much better than the Polo in absolutely every way, even though the Model 3 has been out for quite a while now. Not even released yet, it's already almost obsolete before launch, which doesn't bode well for its commercial success. Now we're going to get into today's topics. I hope you'll find the video interesting. If that's the case, as always, I'm counting on you to show your support by leaving a like, subscribing for future videos, boosting this one, and leaving a comment with your thoughts on today's news. It always really helps with the ranking. As I was saying, we're going to start by talking a bit about Stellantis for two pieces of good news. The first one, as I mentioned, is that the figures for the first quarter of 2026 are quite good compared to those of the first quarter of 2025. The manufacturer managed to generate 370 million euros in profits during this period. That's much better than in the first quarter of 2025 when it recorded a loss of 380 million euros. Its revenue is up by 6% with 38 billion euros in revenue and an operating margin of 2.5%. It's not great. Normally these groups are supposed to be around 6 to 8%, but when you know that last year during the same period, it was at 0.9%, it's still not bad. Now, what needs to be said is that this comeback is still mainly due to the American market, which accounts for about 2/3 of its profits, and where certain brands, like Ram, have seen their sales skyrocket by 20%. In Europe, too, sales increased by about 5%, except that in Europe, to compete with Chinese manufacturers and the increasingly aggressive competition from other brands, Stellantis is applying an aggressive pricing policy, making less profit, and only made 8 million euros in profits there. That's good, but it's not much compared to the 370 million I mentioned earlier. The second piece of good news is that we might see another comeback in Stellantis sales in Europe over the next few years, since they're finally replacing the PureTech engines with other engines. We've known for several weeks that Stellantis is going to completely phase them out in the coming years, both the 1.2L and the 1.6L. First of all, for economic reasons, because the group has to select a limited number of engines to invest in, for certification under the Euro 7 standards coming in 2027, but also for image reasons. The 1.2L PureTech, even if it was renamed 1.2L Turbo in people's minds, it's still the 1.2L PureTech. And it's an engine that, because of its reliability problems, has driven away part of Stellantis Group's customers. So these two engines, the 1.2L and 1.6L PureTech, will be phased out and replaced by two new engines. The one that will replace the 1.6L PureTech will be the 1.5L GSE. It's a 4-cylinder turbo gasoline engine already used in several Italian group models like Alfa Romeo, Tonale, which generally puts out around 180 horsepower but can be pushed up to 270 on some sporty versions, and which is most often paired with mild hybridization through an electrified gearbox. And the 1.2L PureTech will be replaced by another engine from the GSE range, a bit smaller, the 1.3L. The first good news is that we're moving from a 3-cylinder to a 4-cylinder here, since the 1.2L Turbo or 1.2L. PureTech is a 3-cylinder, and basic 3-cylinder S are clearly not the most reliable or durable engines. Here too, it's an engine that's already found under some hoods at Stellantis, both at Fiat and Jeep. with versions that can also reach up to 180 horsepower. Here too, we're dealing with a timing chain engine. So goodbye to the belt problems that gave the 1.2L a bad reputation. So 1.3L on one side, 1.5L on the other. Two engines generally considered to be more reliable than the ones formerly called PureTech, and both engines will be certified for the Euro 7 standard. So starting in 2027, we can expect that a large part of the cars, including French brands from Stellantis like Citroën or Peugeot, will say goodbye to the 1.2L and hello to Italian engines like the 1.5L and 1.3L. That's it, we're starting to see the negative consequences of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz on the automotive industry. We talked about it a few weeks ago at the beginning of the conflict. Indeed, all the media talk about the price of gasoline, talk about fuel shortage problems, but they forgot to mention that this fuel isn't just used to run cars. It is often used in petrochemicals to create all kinds of materials. But they also forgot to mention that through the Strait of Hormuz, there are all sorts of goods passing through. It's not just fuel at all. And even though manufacturers are a bit better prepared than they were a few years ago, especially because of the shortages that happened with semiconductors. After COVID, the automotive industry still has trouble dealing with the unpredictability of delivery times for certain parts and resources. In this kind of situation, the Strait of Hormuz has been closed for 2 months now. At the time, automotive experts predicted shortages would begin after 8 weeks. And that's more or less what's happening now, with major car brands being directly affected in their production, like Toyota. The president of Toyota Industries, Koichi Ito, explained that several suppliers had contacted the brand, saying that some parts could no longer be delivered, at least temporarily. For their part, we know that it mainly affects suppliers who usually make interior car parts, like armrests, door panels, elements that aren't necessarily the most important on a car, but are still necessary to finalize production. Imagine if you were delivered a Toyota Corolla without a dashboard, for example. It wouldn't look good, even if the vehicle can still run. So there are shortages of certain components, and suppliers are saying they won't have a choice but to raise their prices. Because they depend directly for the production of certain materials on oil prices, especially all the items made of plastic. And God knows there are a lot of them in modern cars. Plastics that depend on the price and scarcity of oil, since that's what they're made of. So we're starting to see shortages, slowly but surely. For certain plastic materials, for certain types of aluminum, for certain resins, or even for other materials we don't necessarily think about, like the thinners used in automotive paint, for example. Things that are a little bit secondary but are necessary for a car to be finished and delivered to its customers. Toyota, for its part, has already tried to factor the risk of supply chain instability into its annual forecasts and now assumes it will suffer a production drop of about 200,000 vehicles compared to the annual plan. Understand that this means Toyota will produce 200,000 fewer cars this year because of these shortages. And again, this is just the beginning. If the Strait doesn't reopen quickly, it's likely that all industries will be blocked anyway, at least temporarily. Now we're going to talk about a French automotive supplier whose name you might not know, even though you've definitely seen one of their cars. It's Durizotti. Durizotti is a vehicle conversion specialist based in the north of France, and they've been responsible for this for several years. Among other things, they prepare vehicles for the gendarmerie, including the Alpine A110, for the French gendarmerie's Rapid Intervention Brigade, as well as converting standard utility vehicles into gendarmerie vans. So as you can see, it's an automotive company that's essential to the proper functioning of the gendarmerie. And it has just been placed in court-ordered liquidation. The company has several million euros in debt and will probably have to lay off around 60 of its 190 current employees. It's difficult to separate truth from fiction in this case since everyone is blaming each other. On one side, GTE Automotive, which has owned Durizotti since 2024, explains that the government didn't support it, gradually reducing public orders. Since, in fact, Durizotti depends on public orders. It's literally the French government that orders modified vehicles from them. GFE Automotive also accuses the former owners of Durizotti, known as GFG Alliance, of leaving the company with about 15 million euros in debt without really investing in production resources. On the other hand, the local unions, especially the CGT, accuse the current owners, GTE Automotive, of having received several million euros in public aid meant to revive industrial operations, an investment that apparently never materialized. So who's to blame? What's the real story? We'll probably never know. What we do know is that in the meantime, that's one more French automotive supplier that's struggling. And if it were to go completely bankrupt, we have to wonder who would take over and who would be able to modify vehicles for the French gendarmerie. Maybe a Chinese company, you never know. There you go. That's it for the news this Thursday, April 30, 2026. I hope you found these topics interesting, and if you did, I'm counting on you to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for future videos, and supporting us by clicking the join button below this one. We'll see you again tomorrow for the next video. Thank you for watching this one and have a great rest of your day. Bye.